This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. My name is Alicia, and I'm the new Clean Cities Coordinator for the Southeast Florida Coalition. Thank you for joining our webinar today on propane. Our guest speaker today is going to be Paul Strobis from Broward County Tops Transit. He's the Director for Broward County Transit in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He's a seasoned public transportation professional with 20 years of experience in providing transportation services for persons with disabilities. Since 2011, Paul successfully managed BCT's paratransit program, which is federally mandated by the Americans with Disabilities Act and by the Florida Commission of the Transportation Disadvantaged Act. Paul has implemented innovative ways to control growth and reduce operating costs. One of the major environmentally friendly cost-saving measures implemented included the operation of clean energy propane fueled vehicles to deliver a service. So without further ado, I would like to go ahead and present Paul. So go ahead and present the presentation. Center. Okay.
All right. How's that? Can we see it?
I can see it. Looks good, Paul.
All right. Great. All right. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk to the group today on our experiences here in Broward County in implementing a propane-powered fleet, and share some of the pains and benefits from the program, and hopefully I can answer any questions if the group has at the end. So, a couple of factors to consider if you're looking to implement this into your operation is the type of vehicle that you want to operate, managing fears and misconceptions on propane as a fuel source, fueling infrastructure, the benefits to your environment, and your budget impact. There are many vehicle types. I'll show you a variation that I have within my fleet regarding fears and misconceptions. That's a tough one, and it really takes education by yourself to be able to answer facts, both pros and cons of the fuel source. There's a lot of great sources out there to assist with that. One of the big ones that I partnered with was Perk, which is the Propane Education and Resource Council. They got a lot of great people that will answer your questions, provide statistics, help you get in touch with people in the industry that can assist you. Another source is the Department of Energy, United States Department of Energy. They have an alternative fuels data center that provides a lot of great facts for you as you present this idea to your administration that can assist in answering a lot of questions. In your infrastructure, it's not as difficult as you think. There's a lot of great ideas in introducing propane infrastructure in your operating environment. And the environment obviously is a clean energy source. We'll talk about the benefits there. And ultimately for me, it's return on investment. Is it worth doing? So this is a representation of the fleet that I operate here in Broward County. In the top left-hand corner were the first vehicles that we introduced. These are cutaways on a Ford chassis. They came with a Roush Clean Tech propane system with a 41-gallon tank. It's a dedicated propane fuel system. OEM, it was installed on the assembly line by the bus manufacturer. And that was our first go-round with the propane fleet. Since then, we've gotten a little smaller in our vehicle sizes based on the type of service that I provide in the paratransit world. And so we went out and bought some Ford Tauruses. come with gasoline systems like you'd buy at any Ford dealership, and we were able to retrofit those through a partnership with ICOM North America. They provide both monofuel and bi-fuel systems aftermarket. We went with a bi-fuel system in this vehicle. So it starts up on gasoline and then immediately converts over to the propane system. The next vehicle we introduced in the bottom right-hand corner was called the MV1. This was a custom-built vehicle for the paratransit industry. And unfortunately, there wasn't a system certified at the time for a propane system. So it came with gasoline. We could have converted it, but decided not to invest in it based on the 5-year useful life. It just didn't have the return on investment for me to spend the money to get those converted. And then the bottom left-hand corner is our new vehicle in our fleet. Again, we decided to go with ICOM as the retrofit instead of Roush, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But those also are bi-fuel, so they start on the gasoline and then immediately click over to the propane system. So, you know, one of the big questions that we talk about in these types of vehicles is, you know, do they operate the same on propane as gasoline? And, you know, for me, yes. You know, you don't lose any power, you don't lose any torque. Range was an issue in my first vehicle, you know, to be honest with you, because it burns a little more efficiently. It's got a higher octane. There is a little bit of a loss in fuel efficiency compared to a gasoline engine, but I'll show you that really doesn't make a big difference in the operation at the end of the day. Another thing people ask me about is warranty and maintenance. Roush is a Ford QVM provider, and so that allows that system to tie directly into the Ford engine, the computers. Does not change the standard Ford engine warranty. ICOM also does not affect the warranty, even though it's an aftermarket install. And they're partnering with Ford now to be a QVM provider as well. So, you know, there's different sizes. You can go bigger. A lot of propane systems are for bigger than my E450, which is the largest vehicle in my fleet. And then ICOM basically has a system that'll match almost any vehicle down to a sedan, pickup truck, you name it. They've got a system that'll work for it. So there's a tool for whatever vehicle you've got in your fleet. You know, when I proposed the idea of introducing propane in Broward County, there was a lot of pushback. You know, how is it that the stuff that I cook my hamburgers going to fuel a bus? And they didn't really understand. And they said, "Oh no, it's dangerous. You see every movie, they blow up tanks. You know, there's nothing safe about this. So no, you're not going to do that." And I said, "No, you know, I educated. I provided a lot of this information from the various sources, and I got the approval to buy some vehicles, and this happened. You know, we bought 138 buses in 2014, and 2 weeks before we went live with passenger service, this vehicle melts to the ground, and everybody throws their hands up and says, "Look, the propane's unsafe. We can't operate these vehicles with our disabled and senior populations." And you know, again, we're ready to ground the whole fleet, send them all back to the manufacturer, and you know, again, it took some level-headedness to show that through a national fire forensic investigation that this vehicle burnt with an electric fire. It was a bad motor. Could have happened in any Ford engine in the country. And you know, I'll tell you, I got under the bus 2 days after this fire, and there's still 3/4 of a tank of propane in it. The system did exactly what it was supposed to do. It did not ignite in the fire. The safety valve system in the Roush system, which pressurizes and pushes the fuel into the injectors. When you shut the engine off, it all bleeds back into the tank. So this fire had nothing to do with the propane system in the vehicle. And the system was built with the safety standards that are in place that what was in the tank was still there after the fire was put out. So, um, you know, people think propane is unsafe, but in all honesty, it's safer than gasoline in a lot of areas. So it's got a narrower range of flammability compared to gasoline. There's got to be specific mixtures of air and heat for propane to ignite. The temperature has to get up to 940 degrees Fahrenheit for propane to ignite. Gasoline, on the other hand, is only between 430 and 500. So there's a lot of things that people just assume it's unsafe when it really isn't. And the tanks are built with such rigorous safety standards that they're much more protective of the fuel than a normal gasoline engine that you'd get in a vehicle. Obviously, it's colorless and odorless, and so they introduce, and let me see if I can say this properly, ethyl mercaptan, I believe is the additive, and that's that terrible smell we all get when we're around propane. So, you know, that lets you know that if there is a leak in your vehicle, instantaneously you know. But one of the good things is a leak doesn't puddle underneath the vehicle; it actually dissipates into the air. So you don't have to worry about that in your garage area. So, you know, the litmus test that I tell people in our world is vehicle insurance. It does not cost any more money to insure a vehicle that operates on propane than gasoline, and you can rest assured that if there was any higher risk, we'd be paying a higher rate in insuring a vehicle. So, you know, and for me, one of the biggest selling points is Broward School Systems is operating, I believe it's over 150 buses right now, yellow school buses running on propane, just like my vehicles, with children going to school. So, you know, those things are built like tanks, and if they're able to do it, I think we can too. So, next thing to talk about, if you're going to implement this, would be fuel infrastructure. Looking at Broward County, obviously you've got a gasoline station on every corner, maybe two. Propane, not quite readily as available on a on-the-fly fueling location, so that's something you got to take into consideration. The one thing that I like about propane compared to other fueling alternatives is the mobility of it. This is one of my fueling stations at my garages, and it basically comes in on a skid on the back of a truck by AmeriGas with the fueling dispensers attached. They basically just drop it. So it's got a very small footprint. And, you know, I contract out my service. So this is actually at my vendor's building. When my vendor's contract ended a couple of years ago, we were able to just go in, pick it up and move it to another location and just plug it in, run the electric, and, you know, you're able to do that. Some of the larger, you know, compressed natural gas and other things, once you're there, that sucker's there forever. And the other thing with this infrastructure, it's very low cost. This actually did not cost me anything in capital outlay. It was actually leased as part of my fueling contract with AmeriGas for a marginal increase in the admin fee per gallon. So I didn't pay anything. They just come in, installed it, and they provide all the maintenance for this for me. So another benefit to propane fueling infrastructure. One of the things you got to worry about is your local ordinances. There are requirements for distance from your vehicles, from your buildings. There are some communities that just don't want propane in their area. So you got to really work with your local code offices. Your local fire chief has a say in this. You know, we tried to install this exact station in the city of Deerfield Beach unsuccessfully. They had a cap of 2,000 gallons. They wouldn't let us go over that. This is a 1990 gallons, so it's just shy of 4,000 gallons. And so we actually had to have the vendor move their office out of Deerfield so that they could install this station. But very, very mobile. Another advantage of infrastructure for propane is that you can actually fuel your vehicles off a tanker, a bobtail, as shown in the picture below. It's here in Broward County very plentiful. AmeriGas has over 300,000 gallons of local storage in Broward County alone. And one of the things that we benefited from was during one of the hurricanes a couple of years ago, I think it was Irma, there was no gasoline to be found in Broward County. Even our supplies were so low that I had to park all my vehicles that operated gasoline, and I could only use my propane powered vehicles to perform the evacuations to shelters of our special needs registry individuals. So that was a big benefit for us, and AmeriGas was there to partner and provide that fuel. We're one of the frontline agencies to make sure that there is no interruption in our fueling, and you know, it's been a real benefit for us now over the last 5 years that we've operated. So one of the things I talked about early on was, you know, there aren't a lot of fueling stations, and when we started this, the Blue Star down here by the airport in Broward County was my only facility, this garage pulling out. So basically it was tethered to where the vehicle left our garage. There really weren't a lot of other options in Broward County to fuel up. So sometimes our vehicles, they were getting low, would have to go back to the garage to fuel up. So as you're considering this, look at what might be possible of expanding your footprint. So this year we're adding 3 additional fueling stations with AmeriGas, which are the 3 blue stars other than the one I pointed out. The 2 green circles are actually AmeriGas facilities. They have the same technology that we have at our garage, and their system allows my buses to fuel up at their facilities and or my facility. It's the, you know, the same system. Every vehicle gets a fob that you can scan, and so the billing just comes to me when we fuel up at one of their locations if we were to have some sort of mechanical or a system outage at our garage to pull out. So another benefit of that. And again, mobile fueling, we've had it where our system goes down due to, let's say, a power outage. Had nothing to do with their system. They'll send a tanker truck, and the guy will just walk right down the row of buses, cap them all off with his tanker, and you know, there's no interruption there as well. So a very mobile system. We've had to go out and fuel up buses that the driver ran out of fuel. Very simple. So, you know, the next one, and I know Clean Cities is this is where their focus is on the environment. Obviously, propane is a byproduct of natural gas. It is a recognized clean energy. It's domestically produced. Most of the propane in the world comes from North America, so it reduces our reliance on foreign oil sources. It has the reductions in a lot of the bad emissions you see on the screen here. And, you know, I looked at this and I thought, okay, what does that mean? So here's an example of the impact of converting your vehicles to our environment. One of my original buses, an E450, has a 5-year, 250,000 mile life span in operation. And over that time span, you are going to consume more propane than gasoline. It's about a 6,000 gallon difference, 80 something percent or so, 85%. So this takes into consideration that variance in gallon consumption. But what it does show you is over that 5 years, the reduction in CO2 producing emissions is 133,000 pounds of CO2 over that 5-year life. Okay, yeah, that's a nice number. Over the 138 buses that I have in my fleet of the E450 style, over that 5-year period, we've saved almost 19 million pounds of CO2 emissions in our environment. That's huge. This calculation doesn't take into effect my new Collins buses on the Ford Transit or the sedans, but this makes a major impact in our environment. And as we move, forward in trying to get away from that, oil, gas, diesel environment. And I know everybody thinks electric's the sexy thing right now, but until that proves that it can meet the service demand, this is a pretty good solution as well to help our environment. And as we all know, in South Florida, people come here for our beaches and our sunshine. So anything we can do to impact that, I know, is very important. The last one is budget, and this is a breakdown of Broward County's consumption of propane over the last 5 years. We've consumed 7,200,000 some odd gallons of propane since we implemented the program in 2015 at a cost of $9.1 million. That's an average per gallon cost of $1.27 over 5 years. Taking into account the gasoline equivalent in our region, we would have consumed 1.1 million less gallons of gas for these vehicles. But based on Gas Buddy, the average per gallon cost of unleaded gas in the South Florida region was $2.36 over the 5-year period. And just on that alone, I had a potential savings of $5.2 million of what it would have cost if I operated the same vehicles with gasoline. Then, over the last 5 years, the President of the United States has signed in an authorization for an alternative fuel excise tax credit for any agency who uses an alternative fuel as a fuel source. It is about 36 cents per gallon consumed. It's like 50 cents per gasoline equivalent, so it translates to about 36 cents per gallon. Over the last 5 years, we've applied these 7.2 million gallons to that credit, and we've received just shy of $3 million back in credits, real money that's helped offset my operating budget, which changed my net expense for those 7.2 million gallons to 6.1 million, translating to a net per gallon cost of 86 cents per gallon of propane over the last 5 years, compared to what gasoline, which does not have a tax credit, almost an $8.3 million savings over 5 years to operate these vehicles. And 2020 is the last year of the authorization for this tax credit. And, we push through Perk and our various governmental lobbyists to continue to keep this being reauthorized, and hopefully the Clean Cities advocates as well, because, this just helps when you look at it that over 5 years, my average per gallon cost is $1.50 savings over a gasoline. That's money that allows me to put more service on the street for the senior and disabled people that we transport. So this is a pretty significant cost savings, and the return on investment is evident in the decision that we made 5 years ago to implement this technology. So that is my last slide. I will pass it off to Alicia and try to answer any questions if anybody has them.
I was gonna say, does anybody have any questions at this time? Go ahead, Arlene, you can go first.
Hi, Paul. Great presentation. So when you first started, you mentioned the PERC, the Propane Education and Research Council. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and who is the group, how they're made up, and how one reaches out to them, etc.?
You can get their website is www.propane.com.
Okay.
They are a national organization that helps advocate and educate for the propane industry, and it's not transit specific. It's any propane use, whether it's fueling, home fueling, you know, you name it. They've got technology and advice. They've got training seminars. They go to most of the various industry workshops to present. So I had met a couple of guys at Perk through a conference called BusCon. I was asked to go out and present something similar to this on our propane fleet with BusCon in Indianapolis, and met a couple of guys there, and they, you know, got me, and I didn't know about them right away, but they've got a pretty robust website that will point out rebates by state, any law changes that benefit or hurt the propane industry. So they're pretty robust agency and they provide this free of charge generally for the industry.
Okay.
The other one's the United States Department of Energy. They've got an entire data center. So it's afdc.energy.gov. And they talk about all the various fuel sources. So you can even compare how propane matches up against electric, CNG, gasoline, diesel. It's got stats for all of that. It gives you what type of vehicles are convertible. So there's all sorts of data in there for you as you educate yourself on the systems.
Great, thank you.
Paul, I have a question for you. Has the fuel choice impacted the reliability of the engines?
No. So because it burns at about 105 octane, it's actually cleaner than running a gasoline or diesel engine. So we've actually done a comparison, and my buddy Charlie that's on here actually had provided me some maintenance data during our 5-year project because he had vehicles that were propane and vehicles that were gasoline of the same model style. So we were able to compare our maintenance costs against that, and we actually saw about an 11 cents per mile difference in maintenance cost. And so, you know, you can't have dummy drivers. You know, engines are engines. It does burn a little hotter, but if you get them with the proper prep package, Ford has a prep package for this type of system with hardened heads in your engine. You know, unless you run it hot and you ignore the idiot lights on your dashboard, you know, we haven't seen any differences in engine performance within our fleet.
And my follow-up question was, has there been any feedback from the technicians working on the actual vehicles?
Early on, the Roush system that we originally bought was actually a pain in the patukas to maintenance. I'll be honest with you. One of the drawbacks of that system was their fuel filter was behind the tank. So the only way you could change out your fuel filter was you had to drop your tank and bleed the system to get to the filters. And through feedback from us, they've actually modified their design and corrected that issue so that it's simpler to work on. Other than that, there's really not a lot of difference between maintenance on a propane powered engine versus a gasoline engine. It's really just how the fuel gets into the engine. So there hasn't been any problems there. And all of our technicians get training by the propane provider. Matter of fact, right now with the ICOM retrofits, my vendors' mechanics are actually installing the propane system themselves. They were trained by ICOM, and when the vehicles arrive, they're actually installing that system themselves so they have a better understanding of how it works.
Very cool.
Hey, Paul, I've got two for you. With the ICOM system, how much is the cost of the ICOM system, and where does the supplemental tank go for the propane on the chassis?
So my contract directly with ICOM for a propane system with I believe it's a 24-gallon tank on the Transit is $7,800
Okay.
installed. compared to the Roush system, which was at the time almost $17,000.
Right.
So, and the tank for the Transit is undercarriage as well. The propane for the Ford Taurus is actually in the trunk. We
Gotcha.
actually put the tank in the trunk of that vehicle. So haven't had any issues.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions for Paul?
Hi, Paul. Have you had any other feedback from drivers or any type of negative feedback regarding propane or, you know, the use of the vehicle?
One of the things you have to understand with the pressurized system of the propane is as the engine gets hotter, there's like especially in the Roush system, because it keeps all the fuel in the tank, the pressurization to inject it into the engine. So there's a delay when you turn the key. So you got to be careful with your drivers because they sit there and they're like turning the key, and it's not an instant start in a propane system. There's a delay as the system pressurizes to get the fuel out to the injector. So you'll see maybe a 4 or 5 second delay when you first turn the engine over cold in the morning. As the vehicle's out in service, if the engine is really, really hot, you know, it could take a 30-second delay for that to pressurize. But other than that, no. Again, the engine drive, and I've driven many of my vehicles, right off the accelerator, you get the same power, the same torque. It handles the same. If I didn't tell my driver that it had propane in it, they probably wouldn't know. You know, a funny story, well, not funny, it drove me nuts when it happened, but we actually had a vehicle stolen off one of my vendor's lots. It was a Friday night. The vehicle had just come out of service. We always top off all of our tanks, and somebody broke onto the property and stole the vehicle. The keys were in it and drove it away. We found the vehicle in Daytona. When it ran out of propane, she didn't know how to fuel it back up again, so she just abandoned it and left. So all my vehicles have onboard surveillance cameras. So when we towed the thing all the way back to Broward County, we went and reviewed the video camera footage. And she sat in the vehicle for 15 or 20 minutes trying to figure out how to start it because she kept taking the key out. She'd turn it, it wouldn't turn over. She'd take the key out, do it again. We watched, it was comical actually, watching her trying to get the damn thing started. But once it got going, made it to Daytona Beach on a full tank of propane.
That's amazing. I was going to ask you another question, Paul. Do you have any challenges defueling any of the tanks to service, like internal components?
No, there are systems that are readily available to bleed the tanks, and so that you don't actually lose propane. So it'll take it out, and then you're able to put it back in again because it stays under the pressurization to stay liquid. I mean, you can just bleed it into the air because it does vaporize, but obviously that's throwing money away. So yeah, no, there's systems out there. AmeriGas can put it, or any Suburban, any of the other propane providers have systems that will allow you to bleed the tanks pretty quickly. Isabel had a question.
Yes, thank you. And thanks again, Paul, for doing this for us. And Charlie, thanks for joining us. Nina also, you know, you know, it's so interesting to me, the issue of propane fuel. So how widely used is propane in Southeast Florida? I guess in fleets and schools and counties, cities. And what is there's so many questions. I mean, would you say that there's a primary obstacle to be overcome in order to facilitate greater use of propane?
So we've been expanding our propane footprint here in Broward. So beyond my paratransit fleet, which I've got a vehicle fleet of 337 vehicles, and 278 of them are propane powered. So, you know, I've got the one fueling location at the garage that they leave from. So one of the things that we wanted to do was spread out. So as part of my new contract with AmeriGas, we're adding those 3 stations that I showed you so that my vehicles can top off while they're out in service. The other benefit of that is Broward County has thousands of vehicles, not just my buses, but we have 18 cities in Broward County that provide a community shuttle service.
Right.
And so we've been starting to enter propane buses into that fleet as well. I believe, I think we're at about 30 right now out of a fleet of 85 some odd buses that those 18 cities are going to start operating propane. And obviously they're going to need somewhere to fuel up. So they'll be able to use my stations as well. Or the mobile tanking option is there as well. One city contracts out with a local vendor and they buy the propane directly from AmeriGas, and the tanker comes out and tops off their 3 or 4 buses that they run for that city, whether Davie or Community, Coral Springs, you name it. And we've started looking at adding propane to our non-revenue vehicles as well. We've got a lot of service trucks that are diesel, and so our non-revenue fleet director, has been evaluating that as well, and they'll be able to use my fuel stations there. My partner's over at Broward School System, and I tried to get the number before this session started, but they also have multiple fueling stations at their, I think 2 of the 3 barns right now have propane systems, and I think the last count I had was a little over 150 propane school buses in Broward schools. So, it's getting there. It just comes down to the egg, the chicken or the egg. Do you buy a bus without a fuel system around you, or? And I had the benefit of tethering my garage with the fueling station, but most people won't go and buy propane until they have fuel. And people don't go out and install fueling stations unless they know there's going to be demand to take the fuel. So, for us, it was a little unique in Broward County, but that's what I've heard from other people I've spoken to is, yeah, I want to go out and invest in the vehicles, but how do I get multiple fuel stations in my area? So, like I said, when I was talking about the infrastructure, one of the things that fueling companies, whether it's Suburban or AmeriGas, they will provide you the fueling station as a lease. So you don't have any capital outlay. And it basically just becomes, I'm paying a markup per gallon of 46 cents per gallon. That includes all of the trucking to fuel my tanks. It includes the lease cost. It includes any maintenance. So if a tank goes down tomorrow, AmeriGas dispatches a technician and fixes it for me. And all of that is included in my 46 cents markup over the rack price of propane. And the rack price comes out in a newsletter every week. And right now it's about 55, 58 cents per gallon for propane. So I just pay whatever that rate is plus their markup. And that's what I pay on a weekly basis.
So the fueling infrastructure is very important. I guess I'm wondering, I understand you got the mobile that they'll come out to you. Sounds like there's not a lot of, like Broward County is a big county. You might have to drive pretty far to get to a fueling station if you're driving to one. I'm wondering if cities are, I guess I'm wondering what are the requirements of a fueling station? How much land do you need? Is there a way for the regional council to work with cities to have cities sort of identify potential propane fueling station areas that are appropriate? Or I don't know if that would be helpful.
Here in Broward County, the local code is set by National Fire Code. So for my station that I showed you with the 2 tanks, which is just shy of 4,000 gallons in Fort Lauderdale, it's just north of the airport. That station has to have 25 feet from any building. Anything under 5,000 gallons has to be 25 feet away from a building or any ignitable source of fire. It's got to have the crash rails around it, and that footprint's like 2.5 parking spaces. It's not a big footprint for those. Yeah, it's very, very small. So you really don't need a lot of landscape for my fueling infrastructure. And if you don't need that type of volume, 4,000 gallons, and you can do it with a single 1990 gallon tank, it's even, smaller, then you can put it anywhere. I mean, it's very minimal distance from a building versus a CNG. You got to have generators and these big systems, and then they're permanent. I mean, you're talking a couple of $1 million for a CNG fueling station. My propane system infrastructure is probably about $45,000 for that setup.
Wow, that's very reasonable.
Yeah. And again, with Self-Fart, I was concerned about the sun on the tanks and rusting and what have you. So when I found out that I could just lease it from AmeriGas and they take care of it, I was like, sign me up. It's worth it. But you do have to, part of the overall footprint is important. You got to know, if I put a tank where the vehicle pulls out, do I have enough fuel range in the vehicle? So, I mentioned my first vehicle had a 41 usable gallon tank. That wasn't enough. We saw that only got me about 250 miles range. Mm-hmm. And we needed more like 300 to 350. So we ended up having to change the way we routed our buses for a midday fuel up. So that was a little of a pain in the rear end.
Yeah.
And so feedback to Roush, they went out and re-engineered the system, and now you can buy that same vehicle with a 65 gallon equivalent tank. So now those extra 20 gallons of propane increased the range of that bus where it would have met my needs. Unfortunately, it wasn't available when I bought my bus, but since then, you've been able to buy it at that higher capacity. With my Ford Transit body, even though it only has a 28 usable gallon tank in it, you're getting more like 13, 14 miles a gallon off the Transit engine because it's a newer engine. It's a 3.7 liter engine. My E450s were the 6.8 liter V10 engine, and it was only getting 6-7 miles per gallon on a gasoline. So I'm only getting about 5 on propane. So I didn't need as much fueling capacity in the tank for my ICOM system because that vehicle could travel further on a gallon of gas. So, it just depends on what type of bus, what type of vehicle you want to operate. The monofuel is great on my original vehicle, but now with the biofuel, you can go back and forth. If you do run out of propane,
sounds like a good combination. That way you have a little safety, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you lose a little bit of the engine cleanliness. I mean, if your drivers let the propane run out and you're on gasoline, then you lose all the benefits of clean energy. But it is there as a backup that if something were to interrupt your fuel source, or if the driver was on fumes, now you're not having to dispatch a tow truck or a mobile truck to fuel him up. He can get home on the gasoline and then slap him around for not paying attention to his fuel.
Charlie looks like he wants to say something.
Charlie always wants to say something.
Oh.
You know me too well. So the only thing I was going to say was everything that Paul's experienced on a much greater scale, we've also experienced here in Palm Beach County, where his buy-in from his leadership 5 years ago was jump way in. Palm Beach County kind of dabbled in it, where Paul had 200 odd. Where Paul had a 200 odd vehicle purchase. We only went in and purchased 50 vehicles 5 years ago. And just to give you an idea, we've also experienced some of the same financial incentives that Paul has. And the commitment from our county is to continue with the program. And we've currently got 20 vehicles on order that are going to be burning propane here in the county. In probably the next couple of weeks, they'll be arriving. So again, everything that's Paul said, and one of the big things that he said, and I'm glad he also experienced it, was when we do go into disaster mode, AmeriGas becomes an incredible partner to us, putting us as a priority on their customer list. So truly, they are an incredible partner to us, and the supply, as Paul indicated, is in the hundreds of thousands of gallons of fuel locally, and they can tap into that reserve until things get back to normal. So again, that's truly a big benefit for us when we're in emergency mode and issues happen with access to liquid fuel at the port. We still have that as a backup.
Charlie, when you guys started as well, you had difficulty getting a fueling station in your area, right? You mobile fueled for quite a while.
We did. Paul's absolutely correct. We actually have the fueling stations like Paul at our contractors' places of business, and they're not only subject to the county requirements, but because of their locations being within specific municipalities, they had to comply with those city requirements as well as the counties. So the red tape was quite voluminous, to be very honest with you, but all in all, it's been a successful program, I think, after we got some of the learning hiccups behind us.
Yeah, I know my partners over at Broward School Systems, when they jumped in with their first 90 vehicle order of propane, they did not get permission by the school board to institute a fueling station. So they actually had to use the bobtail method for, I think, over a year. And every night when the buses came out of service after dropping the kids off at home, they'd go back to the garage. So it wasn't too bad because almost every bus is back at their barn by 5 o'clock in the afternoon, 6 o'clock. And the tanker would go in and just go right down the line and fuel up. So it wasn't until they, almost a year and a half later, that they went out and installed fueling infrastructure at their garages to eliminate the need for that tanker fueling scenario.
I want to apologize. I was trying to remember why I didn't think I could participate in this thing. It was because I had an appointment. Well, they just called me and they're like, where the heck are you? So I'm going to have to go. But anyway, this has been a fascinating conversation. I'd be really interested in continuing it. Because I know that the VW settlement was to take diesel, dirty things off. So I'd be interested in continuing the conversation, see how that's working, and really understanding, when you look at all the vehicles, what percentage is diesel, what is propane, what is natural gas, what is electric, and sort of understanding the lay of the land so we can figure out how to see it. But anyway, my doctor says they're going to give me a penalty of $100 if I don't go right now, so I'm going to go. It's been very nice to meet y'all, and thank you again, Paul, and please extend our thanks to Cindy also. Okay, nice to meet you, Charlie.
My pleasure.
Bye.
Bye. And then I actually had another question for you, Paul. Like when you first were discussing going with propane with Broward County, did they have any concerns as far as like liability when using alternative fuels, or did they have a preference for you or anything like that?
No, as long as we were meeting the local ordinances and code enforcements, there was no real issue there. From a risk management scenario, again, there was no increase in insurance costs to have propane on the facility. And much like Charlie, my service is operated by private companies that we award through a competitive bid process. So these are private companies with their own facilities that we just put in the contract. You had to have the propane on your lot somewhere. We pay for the installation through my AmeriGas contract, but they just had to provide space that met the code, 25 feet away from the building, have electrical available to connect up to in their facility. But these new 3 facilities that I'm adding to the footprint here in Broward County are going to be on county property. And so that way there, no matter where my vendors are in the future, I'll always have these 3 fueling locations that are set, and then the other ones might move based on what facility that vendor operates out of. So no, we used to have CNG years ago at a couple of our county facilities. Actually, we're using that footprint for the propane as we move forward after they did away with CNG. So no concerns from risk on that.
How long does it take to implement the fueling stations that you were talking about? Does it take like a few months, or could go into a year?
Sometimes it depends on the city you're in. So that Deerfield story that I told you about, we awarded our vendor a contract, and a year later we were still fighting with Deerfield and their code enforcement to get this station in. We offered to put walls up around the fueling location to mitigate any potential blast radius or this and that. And they just would not approve it. We went down to Fort Lauderdale. We were up in 25 days.
Wow.
So again, you know, that misconception, that education piece is very important. It also, you know, depends on where you're trying to get into. If you're trying to get into a somewhat residential area that, or an industrial area that's on the cusp of a residential area, I think there's more fear. You know, we dropped 2 stations within spitting distance of Fort Lauderdale Airport, and we're up within 30 days. We submit the permit, boom, AmeriGas handles most of the paperwork, and we're up and running.
Paul Strobis.
Mr. Lou, how are you, buddy?
What are you guys doing?
You mass bandit, you.
Paul is being a subject matter expert on propane, Lou.
Oh, he loves his propane.
Amongst other topics, you all know
You brought
this.
all these numbers, propane numbers.
Lots of numbers, lots of rebates, all kinds of good stuff.
Nice. He takes the propane home with him.
He would.
Sorry about that.
You betcha. Thanks.
Okay. Way to
People
go.
ask me if I converted my Mustang to propane yet. I haven't.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Paul, is there like a magic number for a fleet size to make it worth it? You know?
That's a good question. You know, again, I think the calculation that you can look at, and if you were to go on to the Roush Cleantech site, they have these calculators that you can plug in. You know, like I said, to buy a vehicle with the propane upgrade is obviously more money than a gasoline engine. For my ICOM retrofit, it's about $7,800 a piece. I've seen the Roush system closer to $20,000 off a state contract. Of course, I think that cost is completely ridiculous. And you know, so then you got to calculate what type of vehicle are you using it for? How many miles are you going to drive? How many years you're going to keep it on the road? Because I think that goes into the return on investment calculation for you. So I don't know that it's necessarily the number of vehicles. It's more the usage of the vehicles. Are you going to get that return on investment for the upfit over a period of time?
Thanks.
And I think I can also, you know, just jump in here real quick and say that going green costs money, but the return on the investment for the environment is just incredible.
Yeah. You know, one of the rebates that I did not include in this discussion was when we bought our first buses, and I know Charlie also did it, the Florida State Division of Agriculture had a rebate program that reimbursed us 50% of the cost of the upfit. So all we had to do was submit the invoice of the buses that we bought that showed the $17,000 upfit to the Roush Cleantech system, and we got $8,500 back per bus.
Right.
As part of that state rebate program. It only lasted about 3 years, like 14, 15, 16, or 15, 16, 17. And it was a private public split for the money, and there was a cap. I think it was $250,000 a year that you could max out at. So we submitted like 29 applications of the 138 buses, maxed out the $250,000 that we could get back to offset the upfit price, and we did that for 3 consecutive years for that 138 buses, and ended up getting back like $750,000, which, you know, wasn't the total price, but over the life of the contract, I've definitely made my money back in the other rebates for and just the overall per gallon cost. Even if I didn't have the federal tax credit, I've saved money just on the variance between propane and gasoline in our area.
Thanks.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions for Paul?
Oh, we got some secret people out there. Jason and Nina haven't said hello, just listening in the background.
I was gonna say, I know Nina's joining us from the city of Fort Lauderdale.
Hi guys, I actually have a quick question. And thank you so much for the information. It was very, very helpful and informative. I actually have a question regarding the alternative fuel tax credit. Who is usually eligible for that? Do you need to be a direct recipient of funds or?
Yeah, you have to be the one that's buying and consuming the fuel.
Okay, so what if you're like outsourcing the service, like if you have a vendor for your transit services and operations?
That's fine, because that's what I do here. So my vendor is Transportation America. I buy all the propane. It goes into tanks on their facility. They put it in the buses and operate the vehicles. I'm the one that submits the forms to the IRS to get the rebate, because I'm the one buying the fuel. If our contractual relationship was different and Transportation America was buying the propane to operate the vehicle, then they would be the one that was submitting the rebate information, because they're the one that's purchasing the fuel.
Got it. Thank you.
Which then I'd want back in a different price concession in some other fashion.
Very good. Well, I just want to say, I don't know if anyone else has any further questions. Open floor. Anybody else have anything that they'd like to ask Paul, or any comments, Charlie?
Nope, I'm good.
About your experience? Okay. Well, I just wanted to thank Charlie and Cindy and our coalition members for participating in our propane listening session. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to join us as well. Nina, Charlie, Jason, everyone. And definitely, if you guys have any further questions, you could always, direct them towards me, and I can get information from Paul, or vice versa, either way. But we definitely are trying to keep this conversation ongoing, as it is part, trying to make South Florida definitely a cleaner place for everyone. And like I said, I just want to thank everyone, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day. And like I said, you can definitely reach out if you have any questions.
And thank you. This is very eye-opening for me, so I appreciate the information. Thank you very much.
Thank you so
pleasure.
much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.